All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the next Plumeria, the next webinar in Plumeria's Cross-Cultural Community Building and Education series. This one is, as you can see, welcoming newcomer families and mitigating immigration trauma, and that's presented by Shawn Walker. I'm Erin Waters. I'm the president of the board for Plumeria Global Education Group. And if this is your first time hearing about Plumeria, we are a US-based 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to providing cross-cultural and professional development opportunities for people around the world. Today, we're bringing you this interactive informational webinar in support of these goals. Our participants come from all areas of education all around the world, and we encourage you to participate interactively in today's webinar. Please use the chat to share ideas or comments while Shawn's talking. We'll try to answer any questions in the chat, or if necessary, and if we have time, we can share them with Shawn for her feedback in the Q&A. And then the chat button, if you didn't already know, is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If you're on a computer, if you're on a phone, just tap your screen and you should have a chat option come up. Also, in an effort to support those participants who are in areas with low bandwidth, we do ask that you keep your camera and microphone off unless you've been invited to speak. We appreciate that. Thank you. All right, well, let me introduce Shawn to you. Some of you may already know her. Shawn is an experienced ELL teacher. I'm going to get my screen moved here. An experienced ELL teacher with a background in blended learning and college-level ESL instruction and technical writing for international students. She's taught at universities and community colleges, mentored ESL practicum students, and frequently collaborated with educators to support differentiated instruction for diverse learners. Shawn works with immigrant learners regularly in her role as a teacher and coach, and uses her considerable skills and experience to help these learners navigate the challenges they encounter in life and learning. She's in the key position to inform us about this very special topic. Shawn is also an officer on the Plumeria Board of Directors, where she continues to provide guidance for our organization with her insights in cross-cultural education. All right, now over to you, Shawn.
Oh, thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen. So, as Erin mentioned, I'm going to be talking about welcoming newcomer families and mitigating immigration trauma. I currently teach at a blended learning high school. So a lot of what I do is online with students, but I also interact with students in person at different locations of the school. This is as a result because I have worked predominantly with American immigrants. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So what we're going to be discussing today are cultural and educational differences faced by newcomer families in the U.S., actions you can take to welcome and support newcomer families, how trauma goes beyond language barriers and culture shock, and ways you can help students who may have experienced significant trauma in their home countries or during their migration. So is anybody here worked with immigrant students or students from a culture different from yours? Or what type of students do each of you work with? And you can go ahead and just unmute yourself to answer, or you can type in the chat.
Well, I teach at a community college, so I get all sorts of comers. So frequently people that are brushing up on their English skills to work in American universities because they have come from abroad.
Oh, wonderful. Would anybody else like to share?
Shawn, I'm in my role as the International Entry Supervisor at Delphian. I'm in a training session right now, but I'm working with many international students as well as some US-based students.
Oh, nice. Okay.
These are not immigrant students, though.
No, they're international students.
Mhm.
They're still experiencing some of the same barriers that immigrant students face. So we'll be talking about that. So what do we know about newcomer families? Newcomer families mean families who are brand new to the United States. So in my job, we talk about newcomer families a lot. So does anybody have a guess of what newcomer families might be like? As it sounds like, Jen, it sounds like, so you're working with immigrants as well, but usually ones that are higher level.
Yeah, so I can get a variety of different students. Sometimes there's international exchange programs, like right now there's some initiatives coming out of Saudi Arabia, for example, that are sending students to the United States. And so that's just more of an international student type situation, but at the college level. And then sometimes it is members of families that have immigrated here to the United States. And they are now participating in the United States educational system. And sometimes students already have degrees, but in other languages and need to re-credential in the United States, or sometimes they've just come up through the United States system. But I find that in the community colleges, I always remind my students that I could not do college level work in any of the languages that I know. So they're doing amazing work. But community college is definitely a stop for people that want to strengthen their English language skills in the American higher education system.
Yeah, and when I worked at a community college, I had a whole variety. I specifically taught ESL, and in the community college, which is a 2-year college, my students were predominantly immigrant and refugee students. And they had a whole variety of different levels, a whole wide variety of reasons to be in my classroom, from trying to move on to an American college, or even just be able to get a promotion at work or participate in their children's education. So immigrant families, what we do know is that many families, they may or may not have a lot of education in the home countries. Many don't live in single family homes, often like grandparents or an aunt and uncle, or it'll be a broader extended family living together. Often we're seeing our high school students may not live with their parents. Their parents may not even be in the US. They can be living with extended family, an aunt or an uncle or an older sibling. Many are experiencing trauma from migration and family separation. Many want to communicate, and they want communication with the schools. And a lot of the families, based on their experience in their home countries, have a lot of fear when it comes to authority figures, and they look at the school as an authority figure. And sometimes that fear prevents them from really communicating well with the school. And the other school system I know the best is the one in Mexico. But I know this is also true for many, many schools around the world, that it's very structured, very strict, that there's consistent routines, there's uniforms. The schools are very strict with high school students to teach values, actually with all from kindergarten to 12th grade, to teach values, manners, respect for adults. Teachers are more placed on pedestals and would never consider calling the student or parent. And there's typically no discussions in the classroom, but often students are more advanced in basic skills than the ones in the United States. When they come to the United States, they end up being very confused by our education system. It really seems unorganized and chaotic. Here, parents are more involved in traditional K-12 education, but they have less trust for the education system and for teachers. Often we have a hard time getting immigrant students to open up because they don't talk to or have access to teachers typically. And students don't know why teachers or schools talk to them. So if I'm reaching out to a newcomer student, they may never had a teacher actually text them or message them directly. And here we do have conferences between parents and teachers. We have meetings. Often we have meetings between parents and teachers, and that's also something new for the families. So this is, how can we better support our newcomer families, the whole family, not just the student? Basically, promote practices that promote cultural competence, like develop appropriate teaching strategies for diverse learners. That's not necessarily following traditional American teaching. Promote cultural diversity and inclusion. So show respect for students from different cultural backgrounds, including language, ethnicity, country, and build relationships with people from different cultures and avoid misunderstandings, avoid hurt feelings and biases. Also understanding that each person as an individual and relate to them, be able to find some sort of connection. And humor is a wonderful way to make that connection. It really helps draw the student in and motivate them. One of the things we see with our immigrant families is they need basic needs of housing, food, healthcare, things like that. So one of the things we really promote, provide them with local resources. Government resources will cover families who have their documents to be here, but we also have a lot of immigrants who do not have those documents. They are not able to access government aid. So they may end up relying on church food banks, local healthcare services that are free or low cost. We have a lot of typically free English classes for adults. And immigration resources are key. When I worked at a community college in Oregon, every quarter I was there, the Mexican consulate would come to the campus for an entire weekend to help answer students' questions or help them with paperwork for them to acquire a visa. So in the United States, the biggest thing, and especially now there have been changes in the United States, we really need to emphasize to family that the education system, we are not the immigration police. It is illegal for us to ask about a student's immigration status. Some students may just stay longer than their visa is. Some families may have a worker visa and just go ahead and stay in the country. We do not ask. Everybody is welcome in the schools. We also have a law called the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act. And what that means, we cannot disclose information to third parties about a student, identifying information. I even had students ask me, what if an immigration officer comes into the classroom looking for somebody in our class? And I let them know, I asked them to leave. I can't help them. They need to leave. I will not tell them anything. And all government agencies or any organization that receives money from our federal government, which means every single school in the United States, virtually every single doctor's office or medical facility in the United States, all of them are required by law to provide their services and be able to, in the language of the immigrant family, in the L1. So as you can imagine, we have a huge demand for interpreters in pretty much every language around the world. But ways to engage the families is to welcome them, oftentimes bringing them like a food basket to their house, but with somebody from their culture, with like an interpreter, with somebody who knows their culture. Orientation, when we explain how the school works to families, make sure we have a translator who can translate what we're saying. Also provide a point of contact, like one person who they can contact and communicate with. So where I work currently, we have a lot of bilingual academic coaches, tutors, and teachers. So they're bilingual with Spanish because most of my students are Spanish speaking. We will make sure that the families have the contact to somebody who speaks their language. And invite them, host a culture night and invite them to come participate. So to talk about individual students, has anybody here, we're going to look at what challenges do we expect newcomer students to have. So does anybody here ever have you ever lived in a country where you didn't speak the language and can't read the print? And what was that like? Yes, Erin.
Oh, well, absolutely. I've lived in a number of places where that was the case. Even with our fellows here, are also in the room, the Uganda, my Ugandan colleagues who are here. I didn't always speak the language, even though English is spoken in that country, and it's hard to find just the basic products that you need to use. Like, how do you, even if the script is different, how do you read the shampoo to decide which one you want, right? It's not a simple thing. It's definitely a challenge to take care of your everyday needs.
Yeah, and what would have helped you in that?
Well, what did help me was when I lived in Saudi Arabia, they had some English on some of the labeling. Also in Algeria, there's French and Arabic. So I had some background in the French and not so much on the Arabic side. But people helped me. Of course, Google Translate is available, which I can use, but only if I have access to the internet, which I didn't always have. So people were the core source for helping me get through these difficulties that I had with the challenges that I had reading.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm glad people were helpful. So one of the things that Dr. Carmen Sanchez Sadek points out is that all students are English language learners. And all students are limited English proficient at some point in their education, especially when faced with a new concept and vocabulary. So she's including American students who are learning in their first language because they're still learning English. They're still learning how to read. They're learning scientific vocabulary or new ideas. So, this presents a more inclusive type of educational theory. but people can make a difference. Has anybody here experienced culture shock? And did you have any of these symptoms, like anxiety or being homesick, or disturbed sleep patterns, or isolation, decreased productivity or poor time management, and personality changes? These are typical for somebody who goes from one culture to a new culture. These are typical things they may experience.
I can chime in here,
Oh,
unless Jen wants to say something, because I know Jen's also traveled quite a bit. Jen, you want to pipe in here?
I was going to say, I don't know about the drastic personality changes, because a lot of times I've been so isolated that you wouldn't know what my personality was. But with traveling, spending extended time in places like Timor-Leste, anxiety, decreased productivity, and poor time management, just like struggling with executive function because everything is so much more effortful, definitely have experienced.
yeah, that's pretty typical. And even the disturbed sleep patterns can be as simple as if you change time zones. And language barriers. So we recommend, when I've done training with teachers, I've recommended teachers simplify their vocabulary and grammar. Don't talk like a college professor, because a 15-year-old from Guatemala is not going to be able to follow. Be able to, if they're just now beginning to learn language, keep it simple. Speak slowly and clearly. Oftentimes, in learning another language, I've even had students complain of headaches. And I've seen students in low-level classes, just as the class goes on, they fade because their brain is working so hard trying to decipher English that they end up just getting tired. Has anybody experienced that in another language?
I know when I was in Timor-Leste, I took intensive classes in Chayton that were 4 hours long every morning. And they wisely stopped and gave us cookies and tea for breaks during the morning, because the sessions were really long. It was a deep dive class. It was an intensive class. But yeah, we really need the break from the activity, and we needed the caffeine and the sugar from cookies and tea to keep us going, because it's tough.
It is difficult. And in fact, in one of my first jobs, I actually was teaching just basic survival English on how to communicate with an elementary school to the mothers and grandmothers of the children at the school. And they were Somali and Iraqi refugees. So we'd actually also, my daycare workers would do the same thing. It was a practice at that class to take a break and have tea and coffee, or have tea and cookies. We'd always take a break in the middle because their brains were working so hard. We've also recommended, I know there's Google Translate that Aaron mentioned, but there's a translator called deepl.com. And you can use it for free. And it is better, typically more accurate than Google, although Google has improved quite a lot. So we've kind of looked at what the immigration side of things look like. So how is trauma different for immigrants? So we're looking at what does trauma look like? Because with culture shock, with the language barrier, our students are already at a challenge. So when you add a layer of trauma, what does that change? So does anybody have any ideas of what trauma looks like with students?
I don't. I really don't.
Our folks in Uganda, I know you have some refugees there. Helen, would you like to share something?
Yes, like in a class, if you have a learner who is traumatized or who has that trauma is disturbed in the brain, you will find that learner all the time is lying on the desk. All the time you'll find that learner is not participating. All the time you find that learner is just there, but the brain is very far from the class. So that's how we try to identify them. Like if you call that learner and you ask, the learner can tell you, I have this, I have this. You know, for us in Uganda, some children are heading families. You will find maybe the child is not in their family, they didn't eat the previous day. The child is hungry, is traumatized by that. Then also some children, they stay with these other parents, maybe the mother left and now another woman is taking in charge of that child. So you'll find a child coming to school when is having that fatigue, maybe did a lot of work, maybe the child. So that's how they are. That's how we can see that this learner has a problem.
Yeah. So you see a lot of the same things I do among your students, among students who have trauma. You see also they may not live with parents or have a different caregiver, and that how much they're struggling in the classroom. So thank you for sharing that, Helen.
Thank you too.
So here I've seen really 3 areas that can cause trauma. One is what's going on in their country of origin. I know my students who come from Latin America, there's a lot of basically wars going on between drug lords and Central America, and there's a lot of violence. Also, the migration trauma itself, actually going through the system, can be very traumatic. I had one student who didn't really know how to read or write in English script, and the immigration officials misspelled her name. And as a result, her documents didn't reflect what her real name was. And that was kind of traumatic for her all by itself, as she felt like she'd lost a part of her identity. And resettlement, things like discrimination or family separation is a big one. Not being able to find jobs or having unmet needs. Now, here's where, Helen, I'm really glad you brought up about the brain. That was because at this point, psychiatry and psychologists are beginning to recognize trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder as an actual brain injury. So the amygdala, which is way down here at the base of the brain, is responsible for stress. So if somebody has a trauma, that can really, if that's overactive, that can make them feel a lot of stress all of the time. The hippocampus shrinks. So the hippocampus is the part of the brain that's towards the back, but it's what tells us if it's present or past. So the hippocampus can, when those lines get blurred, this is where things like flashbacks can happen. For example, I currently have a 14-year-old boy in my class who witnessed his cousin being shot and killed. And I know, and everybody at my school knows, that we do need to be mindful of that and understand that background of trauma, because he could end up right back there in that scene, you know, and be in a flashback. Also, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for mood and emotional regulation and rational thought, actually decreases in activity as well, because the person is in survival mode. So this is exactly like what Jen mentioned about executive functioning, problem solving, just executive functioning, even with culture shock can be impaired, can be impacted, but with trauma, it can be impacted even more so. So this is a picture, it's a generic picture of a girl from Guatemala. But the reason I have it here is because I had a girl from Guatemala in my class, and I asked in a writing assignment, if you could ask anybody any question, and I was thinking like a famous person, I asked, who would you ask and what would you want to ask? Well, she used a translator and she said that she wanted to ask me what the most difficult thing in my life I had been through and how I solved it. So I gave her an example from my background, and I ran it by a coworker first. Okay, that told me that there is more going on with this student, that she would actually ask me that. So I didn't want to respond in a way that would trigger her. When I did give her a response, she wrote back to me and said, now I will tell you my story. She literally...
Hey, Shawn, should we try the recording?
No, I think we're good. But
Okay.
she literally used a translator to tell me where she came from. So both of her parents left for the United States when she was 5 and her sister was 3. And she lived with her grandmother until her grandmother died when she was 11. And then they moved in with an uncle. And the uncle was involved in drug trafficking and ended up going to prison. They also their dad came back, they lived with him, and then they tried living with an aunt. And finally, their mother sent for them from the United States. They literally had a 12-day bus ride from Guatemala through Mexico to the United States. They were 16 and 14 at the time. When they got to the United States, they were put in detention centers on the border. And even though they were the only family they had each had, the first thing that happened is they split them up. They were allowed to speak to each other for half an hour twice a week. And so obviously this was a student with a lot of trauma in her background, a lot of instability with her family because of the situation in her home country, and also in the migration trauma. And they ended up being in the detention center. They actually got processed very fast. It was only 42 days. But their mother had to come do massive amounts of paperwork. And even when they were allowed to leave with her, they were not sure they'd be allowed to stay permanently.
Creo que voy a cumplir con ya 4 años de estar en esta.
We're going to skip that. We'll post it elsewhere.
So you can find the recording of this story in the chat in the YouTube video section when we upload this.
Tenía más de más de 10 años, más de 11 años sin ver a mi mamá.
Sorry about that.
Ella estaba acá y no regresó ya. Igual mi papá también estaba acá en Estados Unidos.
For some reason, it's not moving past this screen.
Is it not giving your right arrows on your keyboard an option to move you forward?
Hold on, let me see. There it is. No, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second.
Ya 4 años de estar en Estados Unidos.
Okay.
That's a really intense story of that student's journey. I'm sure that students around the world in different locations all have similar stories of family separation, difficult travel, government bureaucracies, and not being treated in a kind of fully human way.
That's true. We do see that. We actually see that a lot. And I think it's pretty common everywhere. I don't know, has anybody else seen that happen in other areas? In other countries, or there is when students can face discrimination even. And right now, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, yeah, I mean, discrimination in the United States, we may be better than other places, but it's definitely still a factor here. So, and I think students feel that very acutely. And it's a barrier to their education because they sometimes feel like they're in a system that's not really there to support them, but is there to reinforce the structures that are discriminating against them.
Yes, and Helen. Yeah, thank you, Jen. And Helen, have you seen that?
Yes, I also want to say something about discrimination. In Uganda now, in the education system, you'll find that it has become natural process because you'll find people discriminating themselves, moving according to their status. You'll find the poor, those other ones also move alone. The rich ones also move alone. Then we have these children with with disabilities. They also find themselves very comfortable to move alone. We have this, so even like Uganda, Uganda is a multilingual country.
Mhm.
We have so many languages. So you'll find like when I'm at the college, you'll find so many cultures are brought together within Uganda here. So you'll see these ones, the Baganda people also move alone. These other ones also, they like themselves like this. So that is how it is, as if it's now a natural thing which is happening in Uganda.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I know I've had students from Africa, and they've usually had multiple languages that they speak. I think it was last year I had a student from Chad who spoke 5 languages, and English was his 5th. So I think that's very normal. And even most people think people from like Mexico or Central America speak Spanish, and they might, but that may not be their first language. They may very well have a home language too. So for some people, it'll be Spanish will be their first language. For other students, it could very well be an indigenous language as their first language, and they didn't learn Spanish until they went to school. And you're right, and oftentimes we'll see neighborhoods or areas that our immigrants will help each other. So one of the ways that we can help students regulate, because when they are in emotional strife, these are some strategies we can actually use. Because what happens if somebody with trauma is emotionally deregulated, dysregulated, where they're even just shut down in the corner because out of fear, one of the things we can do is, well, is first understand what's going on in the brain. Because at those times, it can be being shut down with fear. It can be extreme anger at times. It can be crying. Is understand that what's happened is the right side of the brain, which is the emotional side, is now very active. The left side of the brain is shutting down. That's the rational thinking part. So the challenge is to get it back in balance. So first of all, stay calm when people are in times of stress. Be present to them. You can use supportive words, but again, a lot of these students don't have the same language the teacher does. And so limiting language is important. Even students who may speak English may not have the language to express what's going on inside. Also, model coping strategies. Invite the child to join the coping strategies. You know, things that are, a couple that are very simple that I've used is you can ask the students to pretend they're blowing out a candle and just blow very slow and steadily on your finger as the candle. Another one is you can do an open hand and pretend it's a cookie that's just come out of the oven and have them breathe in through their nose very slowly to smell the cookie. Another one that is very effective is have the students alternate hands and feet. They can stomp, use their feet to stomp, do right, left, even like hands on a table, do right, left, because that going back and forth balances the brain. So those are things that can help actually in a classroom. So these are the discussion topics we've covered today, but I'm wondering, do any of you have other things you can do to help students? I've just named a few. But do any of you know other strategies that help a student when they are dysregulated or when they are in that state of fear? How do you reach that student?
Well, I think Helen will probably, or even Jen might have something for us, but I'll chime in here. For me, I've worked with both adult learners and young learners that have had some traumatic experiences, and listening, I think, being all the things that you said here, but for me, being open to listening and not putting myself in their emotional state, because sometimes it's really hard not to kind of jump on the bandwagon of being emotional when someone else is being emotional, but being that safe kind of soft space where they can come in and have those feelings. That's really what I think has helped the most with the students that I've worked with.
Yes, I would agree with that, because I think with this student from Guatemala, the main thing she needed to do was to just be able to share her story. And Helen, yes.
Shawn, we're seeing a split screen for you here.
Oh, sorry. You're right.
Len, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. For me, I've never been in any other country apart from Uganda, my country. I'm now hearing, I've just heard from you, my mentor, about those experiences that people undergo through, like when they go to other countries. The biggest challenge is the language. Maybe you don't know the language, maybe even you know the language, but the accent. I was hearing my mentor telling us what the experience that she got from Uganda. When we first began with her lessons, it was difficult. Some of our friends were not even able to pick the English from America. But we were there. When you get, you translate. When the student speaks, you translate the lecturer until we coped up, and we went on. Even we performed well. So now, for me to come down such cases with these students who are maybe the new students, the migrants, I think it's better to have a good relations, to have that good relationship with these learners. You handle them so that you become used to them, as they also take you as their mother now from a different country. That one can help this learner to feel at the place. It can help these students to know, to forget about any other thing that we were looking at, like sleeping, like thinking about home. When you create that good relationship with them, I think it can also help them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I would agree that that is like probably the most important thing, is to build that good relationship so that you can become that safe person. Yes. Oh, Helen, I saw you raise your hand again.
No, I was trying to switch off my hand, but again I tapped to raise it up.
Oh. And then Jen, were you going to make a comment?
Oh no, I was just enjoying listening to the discussion. I think Helen's got such wonderful insights.
I do too. I think Helen's got really good insights. So these are the discussion topics we went over. And I'd like to ask, was there any new information you learned today?
Well, I really enjoyed learning about some of the coping mechanisms, the somatic, blowing out the candle and the cookies. Like, that's definitely something that I'm going to dig into in the future to just to help me in my practice.
And Helen.
Okay, thanks so much for this opportunity. Like, I've learned much. As I earlier said, that I've never been in any other country, even my neighbors here, Kenya. So when I am prepared, it's like this webinar has prepared me. In case of any chance to go to another country, I should be able to cope up with the situations of that country. I shouldn't go there and I see human beings and I think that they are not human beings. Then I begin now taking a lot of my time thinking on other things that may take me to trauma. So I have learned so many things. Also, as I said, that Uganda has so many tribes.
Yeah.
So she has also helped me to get ways of handling my learners in class. As I said, me, I teach both. During holidays, I train teachers. During these other normal days, I teach in a primary school. So it has opened my eyes to see how to bring that inclusion of all the learners and give them equal rights in class. Not to see that this one is my tribe and I forget the other tribes in my class. Not to say that this learner is maybe is rich, is from a wealth family, that they always give me soap or they give me what, then I forget the other ones who are not able. So I have learned so many things when you were presenting, most especially on the other part of language barrier and those other indicators. Oh, what does trauma look like? I was feeling for it and I saw, then I said, it's not only in the US, even here, even in our villages, even within just a small portion, such issues are happening. But I'm happy that at least I've moved somewhere in handling such a situation. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I would agree and emphasize that we are seeing trauma from all over the world. My student from Chad was a refugee. I've also had other students here from Malaysia who had left Burma, came out of Burma, came out of Myanmar, and really struggled. And so it does happen all over the world if people move around and different groups mix. And then you end up having to learn to deal with some of these things. So in the United States, I really appreciate you being here today, everybody. So for further questions, I did add my Plumeria email here. And in the United States, we do have certain states where the state governments, because each state has its own government. And we have 11 states that refuse to cooperate with federal government when it comes to immigration. And I added the list of, they're called sanctuary states. And these are the list of the 10 states in the District of Columbia that will not cooperate with the federal government on immigration.
Well, specifically that they won't cooperate on many deportation issues, like
right.
We will facilitate immigration.
Yes.
But
the
deportation issues that we won't cooperate on.
Yeah, they'll actually, in a lot of ways, they're protecting immigrants from being deported by not cooperating with the federal government trying to deport people. And part of the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act also provides that layer of protection, because I'm not going to tell anybody who's in my class. So that actually aids my students, and it helps them, especially students who are coming out of trauma, it helps them feel safe knowing that there is that layer of protection.
Thank you, Shawn. Really appreciate you taking the time today and not only sharing with us the experience that you've had, but the overall overarching idea of what these our friends and colleagues and newcomers are experiencing when they come to the U.S. or go into a different country abroad and have to encounter something entirely different than what they've experienced before, something that they're not used to. And whether they've come with trauma or whether they've experienced it once they've gotten to their final destination, those things are relevant. They're all relevant. And so we appreciate the tools that you've given us today to help us understand what was going on there. I would stop for Q&A, but I think we managed a lot of those throughout the presentation. So I'm going to jump on over to what we have to come. I did put Shawn's email address in the chat if somebody wanted to just copy paste instead of trying to have to write it off of the board. I'm also going to put a link to our YouTube channel where you'll find this video at the end. We do have Implementing Cross-Cultural Student-Centered Learning in Uganda coming up. Helen and I will be presenting on that next month in February. And hopefully you'll hear some exciting things. Helen has a lot more to share than I do, I think. I was there at the beginning, but she's continued the efforts and made great strides in getting student-centered learning into classrooms in Uganda. So for those of us who have joined the email list, announcements will be coming your way for each of the upcoming webinars. We do have a few scheduled coming into this year, and we will post those on our website and send out notifications as soon as possible. We invite you to join us and follow us on Facebook and or LinkedIn to keep up with us as we continue to grow as an organization. And we look forward to doing more with you all in the future and hearing your voice in our upcoming webinar series. So thank you for joining us today.